What if the place everyone in town drove past for decades? That old barn with the sagging roof and the rusted weather vane was never empty at all. What if, beneath its wooden floor, generations lived and died believing the outside world no longer existed? And what if the man who built that prison called it salvation? This isn't a ghost story. It's something much worse. How long can a secret like that stay buried before it begins to rot through the ground itself? What makes a man believe he's been chosen to rebuild humanity with his own blood? And when the truth finally surfaces, can anyone in Cold Hollow Ridge ever look at their town the same way again? The wind had a strange voice that morning, dry, restless, whispering through the bare pines that framed the abandoned Lowell farm outside Cold Hollow Ridge. It was late October 2017, and frost still clung to the yellow grass when Deputy Dan Baxter pulled his cruiser onto the overgrown path. He wasn't expecting much, just another report of stolen livestock. In small Montana towns, that kind of thing happened more often than anyone cared to admit. But the moment Baxter stepped out of his car, something felt wrong. The silence wasn't the kind that belonged to nature. It was heavier, colder, as if the whole valley was holding its breath. He followed the dirt path toward the barn, its wood blackened with age, its roof sagging like the spine of a dying animal. The heavy padlock that once sealed the door lay broken in the mud. "Teenagers," he muttered, pushing the door open with the edge of his flashlight. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and rot. He expected piles of hay, maybe a raccoon nest, maybe the bones of an old tractor. What he found instead made him freeze mid-step. The interior had been rebuilt, divided into rooms with wooden partitions, each section carefully arranged like someone had planned to live there. There were narrow beds made from shipping pallets, shelves lined with canned food long past expiration, and clothes folded with eerie precision. A homemade stove sat in one corner beside a stack of medical books. Baxter's beam swept across the far wall and stopped. Dozens of children's drawings were tacked there, faded and yellowed. Crayon suns, smiling faces, stick figures holding hands beside a red barn that looked exactly like this one. Next to them stood a line of dolls, all handmade, their faces stitched from rough cloth, their eyes mismatched buttons. The deputy's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. It was as if the walls themselves had been watching him all these years. He moved deeper into the structure, boots creaking against the warped floorboards. Behind a curtain, he found what looked like a small chapel, no bigger than a closet. A wooden cross made from fence posts leaned against the wall, draped with dried flowers. Beneath it, on a strip of fabric, someone had painted trembling letters in red. "The chosen will survive." Baxter stepped back. His light flickered. The smell in the air shifted, metallic, damp, like something long buried. He lifted his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need backup at the Lowell property. Possible trespass or something else." The radio crackled, his own voice sounding distant. As he waited, he glanced around once more. The atmosphere pressed down like a weight. A child's shoe lay overturned near the makeshift kitchen. A teacup rested on a shelf, half filled with something that had turned black. Then the floor groaned beneath him. Not the tired groan of old wood, but a hollow, muffled sound. Baxter froze. He knelt, pressing his palm to the boards. There was space below. He stood, scanning the floor with his flashlight, and saw a faint line, a rectangle where the planks didn't quite match. He crouched again, pried at the edge with his knife. The wood shifted, revealing darkness beneath. A hidden compartment, sealed for who knows how long. Cold air rose from the gap, carrying with it a faint, sweet rot. "Jesus," Baxter whispered, taking a step back. When the first patrol car arrived 10 minutes later, its flashing lights cut through the morning fog. Baxter was still standing at the barn door, staring at the open hatch in the floor. Whatever was buried down there, he knew it wasn't about missing cattle anymore. It was the beginning of something far darker, a story the quiet town of Cold Hollow Ridge would never forget. When the officers pried the hatch fully open, the smell that rose from below wasn't of decay. It was older, colder, like dust trapped in time. Deputy Baxter shone his flashlight into the darkness. A narrow pit opened beneath the floor, lined with wood and plastic sheeting, as if someone had built a secret cellar and tried to keep the world from ever finding it. Inside lay a large plastic container, sealed with layers of duct tape, its surface smeared with dirt and age. The lid resisted for a moment before snapping open with a dry hiss. What they found inside silenced the room. There were notebooks, dozens of them, bound with worn leather strings, pages filled with tight handwriting. Old photographs stacked in bundles, some faded, some freshly printed. Among them were birth records, hand-drawn charts, even scraps of scripture rewritten in trembling ink. The first photo Baxter picked up showed 5 females standing in a line against a wooden wall. Their faces were pale, almost identical. Different ages, same eyes, same hair, same frightened stillness. On the back, in neat black marker, someone had written, "My family, 2012. Ruth, Clara, June, Hope, Faith." The officers exchanged glances. None of the names matched any local records. No one in town had ever heard of a family living here. And yet, the resemblance between them was so striking it felt unnatural, as if the same face had been copied again and again through time. A chill moved through the barn. They found more photos, some of children with handmade toys, others of the same women holding newborns wrapped in old quilts. Each picture more recent than the last. Each one taken inside this very barn. Baxter closed the box and took a slow breath. "This isn't theft," he said quietly. "It's a graveyard of secrets." Within hours, the farm was sealed off. State investigators arrived, and the name Jacob Lowell, a farmer who'd supposedly died of a heart attack 3 months earlier, reappeared in every report. No one could yet explain what kind of man Lowell had been, but judging by what lay in that box, he hadn't been living alone. Cold Hollow Ridge wasn't the kind of town where people asked questions. Folks kept to themselves, looked the other way, and minded their own fences. That's just how things had always been. And for years, that silence had kept Jacob Lowell invisible. When the sheriff's department started knocking on doors, the stories began to surface. Hesitant, half-whispered, soaked in guilt. Old Mr. Donahue, whose land bordered Lowell's property, said he hadn't seen Jacob at the diner since his wife died in 1994. "He used to come every Sunday after church," Donahue recalled. "Then one day he just stopped, sold his truck, walked everywhere after that, wouldn't even look you in the eye." Others remembered lights flickering inside the barn at odd hours, and faint sounds carried on the wind. Sometimes footsteps, sometimes a woman's voice, sometimes what sounded like a child crying. But in Cold Hollow Ridge, everyone had their own ghosts, and no one wanted to borrow someone else's. "He was strange, sure," said Martha Keene, who ran the post office. "Always buying bulk food, cleaning supplies, medicine. But he'd say he was stocking up for winter. Who was I to argue?" As investigators combed through records, they found years of supply orders, canned food, fabric, batteries, even textbooks, all paid for in cash. Neighbors recalled him hauling crates into the barn, always alone, always after dark. One teenage hunter swore he once saw a girl through the cracks in the barn wall. But when he told his father, the man shut him down with a warning. "You didn't see a damn thing, understand?" Then came the discovery that changed everything. Behind the barn, among the thickets of wild raspberry, Search teams uncovered a patch of disturbed soil. The ground was uneven, as if someone had tried to cover it in a hurry. When they dug deeper, they found small wooden boxes, handmade coffins, their contents heartbreakingly clear. Tiny bones, for graves in total, all of them children, infants buried years apart. The medical examiner's preliminary report suggested different causes of death: malnutrition, untreated illness, and in 2 cases, deformities consistent with genetic disorders. It was no longer a mystery of a hermit gone mad. It was a system deliberate, organized, and sustained over decades. Detective Sarah Mills stood by the graves as the evening fog settled over the field. "You don't build something like this overnight," she said quietly. "This took planning, control, and fear." As word spread through the valley, the town's silence turned into something darker: shame. People who had lived within shouting distance of the Lowells realized they had heard the cries, seen the lights, noticed the strangeness, and done nothing. For 20 years, they'd convinced themselves that whatever was happening behind that barn was none of their business. Now it was everyone's. The case was no longer about a dead farmer. It was about an entire community that had looked the other way while an empire of horror grew in its backyard. An empire built on obedience, fear, and blood. The notebooks pulled from the container became the heart of the investigation. Dozens of volumes, each one marked with a date and a hand-carved cross on the cover. The earliest entries were almost mundane, notes about weather, harvests, repairs to the barn. But as the years passed, Jacob Lowell's writing began to fracture, turning from simple farm logs into the record of a man slowly sinking into madness. The change started after 1994, the year his wife, Ellen, died giving birth. The death certificate said both mother and child had perished. But the journals told a different story. In the entry dated March 3, 1994, Lowell wrote, "The Lord has spared the child, a girl, a gift I do not deserve. I will keep her safe from the corruption of this dying world." That child was Ruth, and from that day forward, Jacob stopped being just a farmer. He withdrew completely from town life. He wrote that hospitals, schools, and churches had been infected by sin. The government, he claimed, was preparing to poison the air and sterilize the pure. Each entry carried more paranoia, more scripture twisted into personal revelation. "I am Noah," he wrote in 1996. "This barn is my ark. The flood has already begun, but the fools cannot see it. My blood will cleanse the earth." Investigators later found dozens of verses rewritten in the margins, lines from Genesis, Revelation, and his own invented passages describing the chosen seed. He believed humanity had failed, that God had selected him to start over. His mission: rebuild the world from his own flesh. By 2005, the journal spoke openly of what he called the experiment of purification. Lowell described training Ruth to be untainted, raising her in total isolation. He wrote about teaching her from old Bibles and science books stripped of their covers, about warning her that the outside world had burned in plague and radiation. Then, on June 12, 2008, came the entry that made every investigator's blood run cold. "Ruth is of age. The seed must continue. Through her, the line will renew itself. The chosen will be born again, free of the filth beyond our walls." From that point, the writings turned ritualistic, meticulous notes about pregnancies, births, and deaths. He recorded each as if documenting livestock, not lives. Some entries bore crosses beside the names, marking those who returned to the Lord. One final photograph confirmed what the words only implied. The women and girls in the pictures, Ruth, Clara, June, Hope, and Faith, were all related by blood, all of them his. The analysts who read the journals said it felt less like reading a diary and more like descending into a scripture written by a false prophet. The deeper they went, the more evident it became. Jacob Lowell hadn't just lost his sanity. He had built a new world inside his own madness and called it salvation. The deeper investigators went into the barn, the more it felt like they were walking through a map of someone's madness. What had once been a place for livestock had been carefully transformed into an underground home, a prison disguised as sanctuary. Hidden staircases led beneath the floorboards to narrow tunnels lined with shelves of canned food and boxes of medical supplies. There were sleeping quarters, each one small enough to touch both walls at once if you stretched your arms. Beds made from pallets, thin blankets, lamps powered by car batteries. On the walls hung children's drawings, crude suns, houses, faces, but always surrounded by black clouds, by flames, by words and block letters. The outside is dead. On a table they found notebooks written in shaky handwriting lessons, multiplication tables beside verses from the Bible, phrases like obedience is safety and Father protects the chosen. The more the officers read, the more they understood. The children had never been taught that another world existed. To them, the barn was the last place on earth. Lowell's journals described it in horrifying detail. He told them the air outside was poisoned, that only the barn's walls kept them alive. The sun, he said, carried the sickness of man. They were forbidden to open the shutters or approach the windows. The few cracks that let in daylight were covered with metal plates, painted over to block the corruption of the sky. Once a month, when the moon was full, Lowell performed what he called the Walk of Prayer. He would dress his family in protective coveralls and gas masks he'd built from scrap filters. Together they marched in silence around the barn, chanting fragments of psalms. To the children, it was worship. To him, it was control. Neighbors sometimes saw faint lights moving in the fields and thought it was Jacob hunting coyotes. They never realized they were watching a ritual, a parade of the damned beneath the Montana stars. The journals from his final years read like the scriptures of a cult. He wrote of the chosen seed, his divine bloodline, the future of a purified humanity. He saw himself as both prophet and God, the father of renewal. Every action, every cruelty was justified in that role. Through sacrifice, one-page read, comes perfection. The daughters will become mothers. The circle must continue. In one of the last notebooks, written only weeks before his death, investigators found a passage that froze them all. Hope will soon come of age. The father must take her hand. The wedding will seal the covenant. The chosen must multiply. Hope, the second girl in the photos, had been only 6 years old at the time. Lowell never lived to carry out that final act. His heart gave out in the middle of winter, likely from untreated disease. But the world he'd built, that kingdom of obedience, fear, and faith, did not die with him. It stayed alive, waiting, in the minds of those he'd raised to believe the sky itself was a lie. The winter of 2017 was brutal in Cold Hollow Ridge. Long nights, heavy snow, silence thick enough to smother sound. Inside the barn, the only sound that remained was breathing. Jacob Lowell was gone. His body had fallen beside the stove, eyes still open, as if he'd simply stopped mid-prayer. For days, Ruth didn't touch him. She sat beside the body, waiting for him to wake up, to command her to move. The others, the girls, stayed in their rooms, whispering prayers he had taught them. Father will rise, Father will return. But he didn't, and slowly hunger began to replace faith. When the food supply started running low, Ruth faced a truth that had never been allowed to exist. The shelves were emptying, the jars of beans and rice nearly gone. There would be no new deliveries, no expeditions to the poisoned lands. The father was not coming back. She searched the barn for something useful, tools, batteries, anything that could keep them alive. In an old wooden trunk, she found a small transistor radio, wrapped in cloth and hidden beneath a Bible. The device was rusted but intact. She turned the knob. Static, silence, then, faintly, a voice. Music. It was a country song, thin and distant, followed by a weather forecast. And then a new voice. Cheerful, alive, talking about elections, highways, things she didn't understand. The world, the one father said had been destroyed, was still there. Breathing, moving, laughing. Ruth dropped the radio and wept. Took weeks before she could make herself believe it. Every night, she turned the dial and listened in secret while the children slept. To songs, to laughter, to the sound of rain reported hundreds of miles away. She began to realize that everything she'd been taught was a lie, but the others didn't want to hear it. The air will kill us. Little Faith cried when Ruth tried to tell them about the world beyond. Father said the sky burns. Even Hope, the strongest of them, begged her not to speak such heresy. When the last of the food ran out, Ruth made a decision. One night in early spring, she gathered what little remained. Blankets, a few coins, dried beans, and told the girls they were leaving. She covered their faces with scarves, calling them protective veils. To calm their terror, they opened the hatch beneath the floor, crawled through the tunnels Jacob had dug years earlier, and emerged into the forest. The first breath of open air made them all freeze. It was cold, damp, and alive with scent. Pine, soil, melting snow. Ruth looked up at the sky for the first time in her life. It wasn't black or burning. It was blue. They walked for 2 days, following the creek until the trees thinned and the road appeared. The girls cried when they saw the headlights of passing cars, convinced they were weapons. Ruth held them close and whispered, "It's just light. The world is still here." When dawn came, she saw the faded sign at the edge of a small town. "Welcome to Halford Springs." For the first time, she felt something unfamiliar. Fear mixed with hope. The air hadn't killed them. The sky hadn't fallen. The only thing left to fear was what waited ahead. Halford Springs wasn't much of a town. A single main street, a gas station, a diner that closed at 8, and rows of tired wooden houses clinging to the hillside. Nobody noticed the new family when they moved into the old Miller place that spring. It was a forgotten house for forgotten people, its windows covered with heavy curtains, its yard overgrown and quiet. The rent had been paid in cash. The woman who signed the papers called herself Clara Lauren. She said little, avoided eye contact, and spoke in a soft, stilted voice as though words themselves were foreign to her. She came with 4 girls, all pale, thin, and eerily similar, their faces marked by the same gray-blonde hair and hollow expressions. The neighbors assumed they were refugees or some sort of religious family passing through. For the first few weeks, no one saw them outside. The mailbox filled up. Trash never went to the curb. At night, faint light glowed behind the curtains, sometimes flickering like candle flame. It was Megan Caldwell, a county social worker, who first took notice. She'd been assigned to check on families whose children weren't enrolled in school. The Lauren family fit that description perfectly. When Megan knocked on their door one Thursday morning, the woman answered immediately, as though she'd been standing there waiting. She looked exhausted, her skin almost translucent, her eyes darting to the street and back. "I'm sorry," Megan began gently, flashing her ID. "I just need to make sure everything's okay with the children." The woman hesitated, then opened the door just enough to let the smell of something stale drift out. Inside, Megan caught a glimpse of a small living room, bare walls, no pictures, no television. The air felt heavy, as if the house itself hadn't learned to breathe yet. For little girls stood in a line near the kitchen doorway. None of them spoke. They stared at the floor, hands clasped, barefoot on the cold tile. Their clothes were clean but strange, handmade dresses that looked like something from another decade. "Clara," Megan said softly, "do you have any identification? Birth certificates for the girls?" Clara's lips trembled. "We lost everything. There was a fire." Her accent slipped then, revealing something rural, something that didn't fit the story. Megan didn't push, but the unease stayed with her long after she left. She wrote in her notes, "Mother extremely anxious, children under-socialized, possible neglect, follow-up required." A week later, she returned unannounced. No answer, curtains drawn tighter. A neighbor mentioned seeing the woman only at night, carrying groceries in small bags, always looking over her shoulder. By the third visit, Megan's instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. She contacted the sheriff's office. The search warrant came 2 days later. Officers entered quietly at dawn. Inside, they found the same silence, the same bare rooms. But in the kitchen drawer lay a small Bible, and on its first page, written in a careful, trembling hand, were the words, "Property of Ruth Lowell." The woman calling herself Clara Lauren wasn't a stranger at all. She was Jacob Lowell's firstborn, the girl who had escaped from the barn. And now the ghosts of Cold Hollow Ridge had found their way to town. In the interrogation room, Ruth Lowell sat motionless for almost an hour before she spoke. Her hands were folded neatly on the table, her gaze fixed on the dull metal surface as if afraid to look up. When she finally did, her voice was quiet but steady, the voice of someone who had learned to speak only when given permission. "I didn't know another life," she said. "He was our God." Her words hung in the air, chilling the detectives around her. She spoke without anger or tears, describing her father's world as if it were scripture. According to her, Jacob Lowell had taught them that the end of days had already come. The sky was poisoned by radiation, the ground infected, the people outside turned into the sick and the unclean. "He said we were the last ones left," Ruth continued, "that we were chosen to rebuild what was lost. Everyone else had been burned by the fire." She described how he used old magazines and books, showing them faded photographs of cities and people. To the girls, these were relics of a world that had died long ago. "He told us these were the ghosts of sinners," Ruth said. "We believed him." After his death, she tried to keep the illusion alive for the children, because the truth, that the world outside was real, terrified them. They thought the sun would melt their skin. Hope fainted the first time she saw it. Faith screamed when she smelled the wind. Detective Mills asked her why she hadn't gone to the authorities earlier, why she hadn't sought help. Ruth looked up, eyes hollow. "Help?" she repeated. "He told us the people outside would take us away, cut us open, study us. That's what he said they did to the impure. I thought if they found us, we'd die." There was no triumph in her confession, no defense, only confusion. She was both victim and accomplice, molded by decades of fear. When the session ended, the room stayed silent long after she was led away. Even the most hardened officers couldn't shake the thought that what they had just heard wasn't a confession of guilt. It was the echo of a faith born from captivity. The Cold Hollow case spread through the country like wildfire. News vans lined the streets of Halford Springs, reporters shouting over one another outside the sheriff's office. The words "cult family found alive in Montana" flashed across every screen, while photos of the old barn and the Lowell farmhouse became symbols of unspeakable horror. Behind the headlines, the real work began, the slow, methodical process of piecing together two lost decades of captivity. Medical teams examined Ruth and the children for weeks. Their findings painted a picture of life suspended in time. All of them were malnourished, their bones fragile, their skin almost translucent from years without sunlight. The youngest girl suffered from rickets. The older ones had impaired vision from years spent under dim bulbs. Each bore signs of long-term vitamin deficiency and stress-related illness. But the physical wounds were only the beginning. Psychologists reported severe trauma, post-traumatic stress, social phobia, selective mutism, and dissociative behavior. The children panicked when they saw mirrors or bright lights. They refused to remove the curtains in their hospital room, whispering that the air still burns. As for Ruth, doctors found a complex web of guilt, devotion, and fear. Decades of indoctrination had twisted her sense of reality beyond recognition. After multiple evaluations, the court ruled her mentally unfit for trial. She was to receive long-term psychiatric treatment instead of criminal charges. It would be like punishing someone who was never truly free, the judge said during the hearing. She wasn't a criminal. She was another victim. The girls were placed in a special rehabilitation center run by the state, a quiet facility surrounded by pine forests, far from cameras and reporters. There, they began to learn simple things: how to talk to strangers, how to play, how to sleep with the lights off. Still, the world refused to look away. The Cold Hollow case dominated talk shows and documentaries. The barn became a tourist site until authorities fenced it off. People wanted to understand how something so monstrous could exist in plain sight. Investigators kept digging. Financial records uncovered an even darker layer. Over the years, Jacob Lowell had received thousands of dollars in anonymous donations from an entity registered in the 1990s, the Church of the Chosen Seed. Its mailing address traced back to A.P.O. box in Idaho. It appeared that long before isolating his family, Lowell had been a preacher, a fringe zealot who once gathered followers under the promise of spiritual purification. When the group disbanded, he took his beliefs home and turned them inward, on his own bloodline. The discovery explained the money, but not the silence. How had no one questioned his reclusive life? How had no agency noticed the missing birth records, the decades of secrecy? The questions piled up faster than answers could come. By the time the media frenzy faded, one truth remained clear. The real horror of Cold Hollow Ridge wasn't just the madness of one man. It was how easily a whole world let him disappear and take his family with him. 3 years later, the Cold Hollow fields look ordinary again. The barn is gone, the ground leveled and seeded with wild grass. Where the walls once stood, yellow flowers grow each spring, the only trace of what happened there. Ruth Lowell now lives in a small town an hour away, in a modest apartment above a grocery store. She works evenings as a janitor at the local library, moving quietly between shelves, avoiding conversations. The staff say she never complains, never raises her voice. Sometimes, when the library closes, she lingers in the children's section, staring at the picture books she was never allowed to see. Her daughters, Ruth still calls them the girls, attend school under new names. They've begun to blend in, though the shadows of their past never fully fade. The oldest excels in science, fascinated by how things work. The youngest still sleeps with the light on. Teachers describe them as polite, distant, and fragile, as if they're always listening for a sound the rest of the world can't hear. In her first and only interview, Ruth spoke softly, her eyes fixed on the window. "I still dream I'm underground," she said. "But now I know it's not the sky that burns us. It's the shadow of what we came from." The old site of the Lowell farm is now under state protection. Every year, Local volunteers place a single wooden cross in the field to remember the victims. Not only those who died, but those who lived through it. After the case, Montana passed a new statewide program for early child welfare monitoring, random home visits, rural community checks, outreach programs. It was named the Lowell Initiative. For many, it was meant to ensure nothing like this could ever happen again. But in her final report, the journalist who revisited the case wrote something that still lingers. We like to think monsters live far from us, deep in forests, beneath the earth, in places we'll never go. But sometimes they live next door. Sometimes they wear ordinary faces. And sometimes they raise their children to believe the world outside their walls is the real evil. And then she added one final line, quiet as the wind that moves through Cold Hollow Ridge. The barn is gone. The silence remains.